Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome friends once again to the NPTEL module on strategic trade and protectionism, theories and empirics. We are at the very last lecture of this particular course, where we have been trying our best to give a complete summary of strategic trade and protectionism over last all 39 lectures. So, without delaying further, let me quickly start with the complete discussion we made as part of our concluding session. So, let us start with here. So, in the very beginning of the lecture in the week number 1, we started with discussing various latest evidences of international trade, particularly highlighting the strategic issues across the member countries. So, thereby member countries used to take number of protectionism measures which may not be actually right or may be right depending upon the context we have been discussing. So, whether right or left it is very trivial to understand. So, therefore, we are supposed to look at the exact theories and certain empirical evidences to it. So, in short, what we have looked at why theories or why facts as an anecdote to the understanding of in strategic trade. So, we largely tried our best from the theories in some of the lectures on small country versus large country discussions, especially for strategic partnership or related to protectionism. Then we also moved to the understanding of very important aspect called intra-industry versus inter-industry trade, which is in connection with connection with the present days nitty-gritties of trade, where many products are slightly differentiated. So, therefore, we are living in a monopolistically competitive market. So, which has raised to the possibility of intra versus inter-industry trade, and largely we discussed it. Similarly, we discussed as part of protectionism policy, we discussed various forms of protections including nominal and effective rates. So, we have already made the exact discussion. I will unfold the exact week when we discuss those. Then we also talked about tariff versus non-tariff measures. Then we discussed in the very latest week on trade blocks versus trade blocks as part of our last week session, and within that session also we emphasized trade creation versus trade diversion. And another theory by Professor Jagdish Bhagwati on emerging growth rate, which is part of a strategy for the developing countries to grow for protecting their terms of trade, also been discussed. So, let us start with the first and two lectures. First and second lectures are primarily on understanding facts and figures or the recent evidences, certain cases. Third lecture onwards, we emphasize quite holistically on the international trade and its figures. We talked about current account deficit as percent of GDP, so crude oil prices and its implications for developed and developing countries. We also emphasized top 10 and bottom 10 exports and import destination countries, their composition of exports and imports. In addition to that, we emphasize different types of top 10 commodities and services. Then We also explained the top economies and with the comparison with India, top remittances countries and FDI in portfolio investment, forex reserves, those discussion already made in lecture number 3. Now, especially in lecture number 4, we try to identify from the beginning of the week on what are the facts on trade policies or facilitations in different countries. We unfold the discussion of the East Asian crisis to East Asian miracle of the particularly the 10 years journey and the miracle how those countries actually change the paradigm and why facilitation is largely required. Some of the theories are discussed in the next already been discussed in some of the lectures. So, we discuss how those miracles are also having attached with number of possibility of burst. So, most problematic factors importing India also we emphasized. We talked about ASEAN and OECD and its comparison to India, especially related to import restrictions. There are various restriction indicator we mentioned. So, we also collected the information on India's trade policy, especially the latest foreign trade policy FTP 2015. That is the latest document. You can get it from the sources I mentioned during that week, lecture number 4 of week number 1. Then we emphasize what are the documents required to export, what are the documents required to imports, what are the processing export orders, trade related in trade agreements or RTAs in force in accession and negotiation are also discussed. In lecture number 5, we started emphasizing on the pure theory, trade theories. I mean why trade theories are required. So, in trade theories we emphasize basically on fallacies of international trade. There are also fallacies, we have certain myths and beliefs. We emphasize recent theories and factors relating to trade based on the theory. So, evidences also were there to prove the theory, whether the theories are actually correct or not. So, we checked with the rationality of the data, then what are the social and political questions to the theory. We also answered is free trade always the case and is it good, is trade good through the theories. So, some of the fallacies you can follow, I mean all the fallacies can be followed from the concerned lecture. In week number 2 onwards we emphasized the exact theory, the founding theoretical or the theoretical base of classical theory. Is none other than mercantilism. So, we discussed that mercantilism largely believe on exports not not imports. So, we check their historical background, then when during what time also the decline of feudalism that led to the change of mercantilism, then also the break of mercantilism was largely due to the change in technology. Then we emphasize the main points of mercantilism like they believe in bullionism, colonies and their role in mercantilism, then the seas and they restrict the seas routes to the and then they also talked about population and their changes. So, there are the thinkers called physiocrats during that period. The criticism of physiocrats are also emphasized. Then 2 ways also we discussed 2 ways to increase nation's wealth. Triangular trade between the different countries are emphasized how triangular form actually was one of the most important aspects of mercantilism. Then also we talked discussed some early writers, then mercantilist thinker like physiocrats. So, Thomas More like economists were emphasized. From lecture 7 onwards we arrived into the core classical theory by the father of nation called Adam Smith. So, as from the picture we also gave the same picture during that lecture where we discussed that it is the invisible hand which is responsible for correcting the market. So, therefore, we need not worry. So, this is a theory from 1723 to 1719. So, they attacked Adam Smith theory attacked on the mercantilism on various grounds. We can follow it from the lecture number 7. So, then they strongly believe in laissez-faire, basically on what is the basis for trade, what are the gains from trade, and how I mean how the trade takes place, basically what is the patterns of trade. So, largely Adam Smith theory is based on absolute cost advantage. We also gave this example to verify between the US and India, and here we are mentioning labor productivity, and accordingly you can check the answer for it. In lecture number 8 as part of the week number 2, we emphasized comparative cost advantage by David Ricardo. So, we talked about opportunity cost in detail, also emphasized production possibility frontier. So, we derived the diagram and placed the differences. From the example you can verify the range of trade. Once again from the lecture I have categorically mentioned, there will be some questions expected also exam, those who are willing to appear for the exam, and there will be no question of committing errors. Now, regarding the discussion of specialization, complete versus incomplete specialization, again I discussed that this is the theory based on complete specialization and based on their assumptions. Later on we also talked about revealed comparative advantage. It is not just comparative advantage by on its own as compared to the world. For a particular product, its exports to the world exports divided by the total exports of that country, we divided by total exports of the world, we discussed already. So, basically this is the ratio of exports, and this is the ratio of exports of the particular product. So, we also cited the number of examples for the revealed comparative advantage between India and China, where we said that we need not worry, India has a large number of revealed comparative advantage. And we also cited one case published in the recent paper 2019 newspaper in Financial Express on India must focus on areas it has comparative advantage rather than fear of rise of China. So, largely we talked about RCA based index. You can also follow from WITS database to check the differences in different indicators, those who wish to do certain survey on it. Now, we, as I just said in the Financial Express newspaper, now this is India's context in everywhere, in all segments, fuel, agriculture, of ores, metals, except manufacturing. Rest cases India has advantage in revealed comparative index approach as compared to China. So, therefore, India has huge potentialities for its growth, and these are the figures given from 1990 to 2014. And on lecture number 9 we discussed static to dynamic comparative advantage theory, where we largely attach number of neoclassical comparative advantage theory and their assumptions. The static demand and supply diagram to explain it, also attach various changes in the static part with the change in the assumptions. Now, on the follow up lectures like lecture number 10 there are certain empirical testings of comparative advantage made. Especially we analyzed the catching up economies model with ASEAN countries. There were one example taken from one of the paper which captured domestic trade balance and international competitiveness, and also on products mapping we will explain shortly. This is the equation we discussed just before, revealed comparative advantage. And there are another approach given by revealed systematic comparative advantage, we already discussed by Dalum et al. In 1998 and Larson 1998 paper. Now, this is the equation, you just go and follow, it is because of paucity of time, and we are concluding the discussion. So, therefore, I am not emphasizing. And last one to be emphasized by to understand that comparative advantage, trade balance index was also suggested by Leffe 1992. We also discussed that with this equation, and you can also check their extreme point, the range of each of the points can also be checked from the lecture number 10. Now, after that we try to refer an article published in a journal called the Geese Flying Product Mapping Model, where we discussed TBI index as I just said, RSAI, and accordingly we divided 4 parts. These are the 4 parts we discussed, and please refer to lecture number accordingly. Now, in the context of new classical trade theory and standard trade model, we started discussing in week number 3rd, where we talked about commodity independence curve, and from this onwards we said that specialization is incomplete because of the realistic assumptions taken, and all each country are not just producing entire products of the same variety, and since the principle is based on increasing cost function. And so, in the lecture number 12 we discuss about Hexter-Ohlin theory of trade. We have emphasized abundance versus intensity. You can follow it from the equation, abundance by physical and relative factors. Then Stolper-Samuelson theory through HOS theory, especially her returns to scarce factor were emphasized, how trade actually facilitates scarce factor. We also discussed factor intensity reversal, emphasized by Professor Minhans, Indian economist, which is quite criticizing the HOS model. And we discussed the income distribution approach by citing various theories called HOS theory, Hexter-Ohlin-Samuelson theory. Then we discussed factors, if a factor fixed by Haberler and Keynes approach, Ricardo and Weiner approach related to some factors fixed depend on due to short period and long period. So, you just go and check how those short period and long period relevance of HOS theory are important. So, I have already just said we emphasized the empirical testing of HO theory, we talked about Leontief paradox, we talked about factor intensity reversal, we also emphasized through transportation cost and their distribution. Extension of HO theory was emphasized in lecture number 15, where we discussed product cycle model, interrupt from trade, dynamic technological differences through technological gap model emphasized in Posner 1961 and product cycle model by Werner in 1966. So, similarly, we also emphasize outsourcing and intra-industry trade. On lecture number 16, week number 4, we talked about types of economy of scale, then competition and monopoly, monopolistically competitive market, where we emphasize inter-industry versus intra-industry trade. You can go and refer accordingly. And monopolistic competition and trade was emphasized in lecture number 17, especially with the extension of Krugman model. We talked at large, where we derived in lecture number 18 for intra-industry versus inter-industry trade, where we differentiated horizontal versus vertical inter-industry trade, emphasized by Bakshi in his paper, and it is famously called GHM approach, tested at HS 6 digit level. So, they also emphasize HVIT and LVIT. H stands for high vertical and low vertical vertical intra-industry trade. So, and there are number of cases given as compared to IIT and intra-industry trade and rest of the world cases. So, we measured intra-industry trade by different approach, by Global and Lloyd approach, then BG approach, Bergstrand approach, then we talked about Global and Lloyd on corrected approach and also corrected approach. You go and follow the respective lecture, you find out the answer for it. Now, lecture number 21, week number 5, we started discussing about partial equilibrium analysis of trade, where we emphasize the simple demand framework, and from there we also derive a general equilibrium analysis by using offer curve, and from where we discussed the terms of trade at large. So, offer curve in trade analysis was also emphasized separately in lecture number 22, where we discussed Marshall and Edgeworth box diagram. We discussed of how to derive reciprocal demand curve as mentioned by J.S. Mill, and in lecture number 23rd we referred oil shocks and its impact on terms of trade. We referred to small country context, we talked about general equilibrium context. Emerging rising growth rate was emphasized in this lecture, and also we referred the data, the figures of last 10 years on it. And how to measure terms of trade, there are various instruments developed by Jacob Weiner and Mayer, and also determinants are emphasized, but there is a different approach mentioned by Mayer and with certain composition made by the professor. And in lecture number 25, we talked about purely on determinants and its impact on trade. On lecture number 26, we talked about just a minute, we talked about trade protection. From week number 6 onwards, trade protectionism were discussed at large. Why protectionism, what are the different types of protectionism, arguments in favor, arguments in against, and certain cases were given with the US and China trade war. And these are the maps we discussed at large. You can go and follow accordingly from the respective session. Lecture number 27 particularly on emphasizing types of protections, and on the types we compared ad valorem, specific and compound, import quota, economic effects of quota were also discussed, VR, voluntary export restraint, then product subsidies, embargoes, foreign exchange control. As we mentioned that tariff is not always successful. There are many evidences of non-tariff barriers raised among the member countries, because tariff is retaliatory and actually retaliated by another member country. On week number 28, we discussed welfare effects of tariff on consumers, producers, revenue. So therefore, we discuss partial equilibrium analysis of tariff. Then we discuss about other potential cost of tariff, WTO and its relevance of tariff, and which rounds or which negotiations tariffs are discussed in which level. Then Indian tariffs are actually emphasized with different time periods with the latest figures. So another lecture on 29 specially, we compare the nominal versus effective rate of protection, and with value-added approach as well as the value-added approach was mainly used. So the theory of tariff structure was emphasized. The rate of effective protection are measured by this equation, as we already mentioned. You go and check. We compare, after looking at this, we compare a small country versus large country context. We also refer the context for Stolper and Samuelson theory on distribution of income. We checked with optimum tariff in order to understand the effective tariff discussions. Now, we also have in lecture number 30 on effective protections, latest facts and figures, especially on Indian tariff, WTO and tariff rates. Then US and China tariff, why the tariff trade is taking place recently between these two countries. Then we try to map the extent of restriction of import and export by region, by sector, by tariff escalation by referring UNCTAD database. Then we check the world map with their effective rate of protection with different examples. Here the one just sample of it, which we have discussed at large in different sections. So now look at very restrictive areas are here, and India and some parts of Africa. So these are the topmost restrictive, import restrictive countries as per the UNCTAD report 2017. Now on week number 7, we unfolded the discussion for non-tariff measures, especially highlighting the number of non-tariff barriers, those who are in force or in practice. Also we understood MFN, most favored nation tariff of different groups or different regions, and protectionism in international trade has been on the rise, is one of the conclusion of our understanding. High income countries increasingly use non-tariff barriers as compared to tariff measures. Subsidies and state aid measures are increasingly applied as well, but it is not among the highest, but the other indicators are highest. And non-tariff barriers are significantly, non-tariff barriers significantly reduces significantly reduce trade, as emphasized in different article we referred during the week and its discussion. Similarly, share of non-tariff barriers, tariff and trade defense measures were made and discussed of India as compared to others. Type of non-tariff barriers and protectionist policies were also emphasized. Number of non-tariff barriers, those who are above 400 to 800 or with a range of 400 to 800, It is US, we have repeatedly said US has more than 800 non-tariff barrier cases, as against India it is around 398 cases till 20 from the duration 2009 to 2017, and other parts of country are in this range, but these are the most important restrictive countries so far as non-tariff barrier is concerned, and these are the reports collected from Global Trade Alert database. Then as part of the discussion on non-tariff barriers, as I said, these are the way we discussed: quota, subsidies, voluntary export restraint, dumping. Then we discussed their implications to the society. Then on the very last week discuss about trade creation versus trade diversion. So, and also the theory of second best. I am just coming to the discussion of theory of second best in a short while. So, ultimately we are emphasizing on the economic welfare of different countries. So, on lecture number 32, largely we talked about types of non-tariff barriers, different types, though it was there in the chart. Now, there are certain trade defense measures, anti circumvention, anti dumping, subsidy, then safeguard. Then in non-tariff barriers majorly we discussed these: import controls, subsidy, state aid and subsidies, procurement policy, localization, capital control, export control. So, and most importantly is not SPS and TBTs, those we have separate sections also. Now, this is the map where we discuss very restrictive use in which part of the country, again India, US, so far as those measures are concerned, non-tariff measures are concerned. Now, another map which captures non-tariff measures and their relative intensity across countries. The intensity is very high when measures are taken, intensity is very high in China and some parts of European countries. Okay. So, you go to the respective section and verify accordingly. On lecture number 33, we checked the import quota. We said that higher domestic, it has impact in terms of higher domestic price as compared to tariff, and import quota has higher domestic production than tariff, whereas tariff has higher consumption impact than quota and higher imports than quota. So, some of the comparison we made it. On lecture number 34 particularly, one of the latest aspects of trade restriction or protectionism is none other than technical barriers to trade. We discuss it, what are technical barriers, how is it different than SPS, we discuss about the provisions of non-discriminatory norms of WTO, then transparency patterns of WTO. We also emphasize different TBT committees and who are the members, who sits, what kind of issues are taken off. We also at large emphasize the developing countries context and what kind of assistance are provided by the secretariat in this context are emphasized. Now, this is very important figure because it is a very latest, where 25,000 TBT notifications are made to WTO, out of which 473 specific trade concern STCs are raised. Out of that, only 6 disputes are actually discussed on WTO negotiations. We will discuss how as per the October 2015 data. Now, this is the one how processes are there, regulatory processes by which any decisions are taken. Now, periods are given, you go to that and then check how it takes time. This is a report taken from WTO on TBT. Similarly, SPS also we checked all those questions, the figures were collected for 2017, estimates of SPSs are made, then India's implications on these SPS measures, issues related to transparency. A special case was solved, we have given this case study on cinnamon exports from Sri Lanka as a case discussed, where we emphasize how the SPS committees could able to actually solve the problems for Sri Lanka's exports of cinnamon to European countries. So, on the week number 8, at the last week we discussed most importantly on economic integration. Finally, after understanding restrictions, initially we discussed theories, then some restrictions, some protection, tariff and non-tariff, then we unfolded the discussion of integration, how member countries are actually integrating, joining hands together to develop strategies, and accordingly they protect themselves. So, we discuss the history of use of integration. We discuss blocks as compared to block. This is restriction, this is actually groupism or developing groups. There are success and failure aspects and types of trade blocks, especially we discuss preferential trading agreement, free trade area, customs union, common market, economic union. We cited different countries examples, especially Mercosur we cited, we cited ASEAN, we cited European Union, we cited SAFTA, we cited NAFTA. There are various ways by which you can differentiate. You can refer to lecture number 36 for further clarity. Now, as per the discussion in the WTO, there are certain principles by which these are made. One is called without discrimination principle, MFN status, and what are the exceptions to those MFN are actually taken up in the succeeding lecture. Now, on lecture number 37, we discussed the theory of customs union, where we emphasize the static effects of integration. We emphasize very clearly on trade creation versus trade diversion. Some members are creating trade, whereas while creating there are some cost issue also with the earlier membership. So, it also diverts certain possible cost. So, while we have different forms of creation versus diversion, there welfare is not optimized. So, therefore, some theories on second base principles are suggested. Dynamic effects of customs union are also suggested. You can refer. Benefits and or cost of member as well as non-member are talked about, and conditions are more likely to lead to increased welfare. We also discuss some of the conditions. On lecture number 38 particularly, we discuss structure and functions of WTO, especially trade negotiation, trade disputes, settlement, structure, objectives, functions, their scope related to goods, especially in the GATT period it was restricted to only goods, but services were actually taken off from WTO inception in 1995, and TRIPS also included TRIMS, GATS, services related. We discuss argument in favor of WTO. These are the structure: ministerial conference, which is at the apex body of WTO. There are sub bodies, majorly dispute settlement body, general council and trade policy review board. Under general council, goods, intellectual property, services are actually included. The details you can follow it from the WTO website. Here is the platform we have already discussed in detail in that lecture. Now, till that date 98% of the total trade is actually accompanied by the member countries. Still there are some countries are in the accession process, only 22 and some countries are actually not at all the member. Okay, so, you can follow this also through WTO website, and you can click also each of the points separately. So, on the lecture number 39, we unfolded the discussion of recent cases, especially one important case, a dispute settlement case raised by Bangladesh on Indian film industry for a particular movie Murder, where a song was actually copied from Bangladesh music band called Miles. So, they raised the complaint against Anu Malik, and through the various dispute settlement bodies, by highlighting the intellectual property rights case, Bangladesh won the case, and then there are a number of compensation made, and WTO guarantees the protection of certain issues. So, therefore, this was discussed. You can refer to lecture number 39 in clearly. Then in India's latest RTAs, regional trading agreements as part of international integration are discussed. Those are in 4, those are in accession, these are in early announcement, and those are in group like G20, G33 nations, G7 nations. Those are actually discussed in detail. Now, this is the map at the last of our concluding session on how disputes are actually dealt, especially from Indian case. Now, if I cite 11 cases were raised by India on US product, whereas this was the case India is the complainant, and in blue India is solving, is actually as a respondent to the complaints raised by different countries. Similarly, in the red color it is highlighted as India is actually complaining or raised complaint in the WTO negotiation for number of violations made, whereas in the blue it is India is resolving and or India is actually the respondent to the complaints raised by different committees. So, in short, we discussed the complaint for India 24 complaints, as respondent 31 and as a third party 160. So, so friends, what we have made in totality, in short, we discussed classical theory to modern, the new classical based on the context, their cases. Then we actually wrapped up with various factors, various diagrams, modeling, measurement to have better strategies. And we also talked about the latest policies which are used at large for strategy and protectionism by the member countries, and at the last we summed off with integration, how member countries tie up each other to have a better and a holistic strategy in the present date of discussion of strategic trade and protectionism. So, therefore, these are all for discussion. I hope you enjoy all the sessions on different issues, and many contexts are already given within the each of the PPTs to answer the questions which are going to be asked in different sessions for evaluation. I hope this is going to be very successful, and if any doubts are coming, you can clarify during the each course of his interaction we will have separately, and you can raise your questions, and there are a number of questions also floated in addition to each week lectures. So, with this I should stop here. Thank you so much.